Check, mic check. Yo, I'm losing the light here, and I come to sit out here to record this, and then a fucking Walmart truck pulls up right in front of my building and apparently is delivering groceries to every single person who lives in the building for half an hour. Just like Walmart to disrupt small independent enterprises, right? Anyway, you got the sounds of the city. I needed a fucking chill day today because everything that's going on, I'm so checked out of it. So I read some Derrida because we did the episode on Derrida last week, and this will be a supplement or a supplement to that. A little Derrida joke in there. I wanted to do this because Derrida keeps getting asked about in the patron things where I say, what do you want me to do next? And so we've done one thing, and this will be the next thing. And the next video for this month will probably also address Derrida. I think it will. I've started writing it, and unless something better comes along, I'll do that. But for today, I picked not a book, but a section of a book that's real fitting for this because it gives the sense of Derrida's whole early project. So the book was written in 1972. It was after his super productive year where he published 3 books in the same year, Speech and Phenomena of Grammatology and Writing Indifference. This one is called Dissemination. And the section that I'm talking about is called Plato's Pharmacy, which is fitting for a channel called Plastic Pills. So we're doing Plato's Pharmacy today, and the concept term of this vlog is Pharmakon, which is a Greek word that Derrida deconstructs, or rather he deconstructs the legacy of that word. And along the way, it kind of explains a whole bunch of things that Derrida is known for and that he likes doing. So I thought it would be a good example to follow up from the chat about Derrida that we had on the podcast, which doesn't always go the way that I would go if I were doing stuff on my own. So this is me doing Pharmakon on my own. Concept vlog number 2. So thanks for coming out to chill. And yeah, this is the kind of thing that's good to, I think, put on in the background while you're doing something else. And maybe you learn something interesting, want to pick up the book. So Plato's Pharmacy is the subject of Derrida's Dissemination. And the book that's being glossed here is Plato's Phaedrus dialogue, and one specific part of the Phaedrus dialogue. And since there's no time limit on this and no rush, I thought I could just read it. It's a little bit boring to just read it, but everything that Derrida talks about in Plato's Pharmacy relates to this little section. So rather than summarize it in my own terms, I thought it'd be fine to just read it. It's not long. So Phaedrus is one of Socrates' interlocutors, and also the titular character of the dialogue, the Phaedrus. But in the middle of Phaedrus, Socrates tells this story. And the story is about the king of Egypt, Thamus, and the Egyptian god of writing, Thoth, although it's spelt Thuth in here. I don't know anything about that, so I don't know what the difference is, but the god Thoth I think it's depicted by like a long-nosed bird. I want to say like ibis or something. Why don't I look it up so I don't give you bad information? Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm cutting because I had to check it out on my phone. So it's an ibis head bird, and he's the god of scribes, so writing primarily, but also numbers and astronomy, I believe. So kind of the technical arts is kind of the sense you get from this god Thoth. So Thoth comes to Thamus, and Thamus is a mythological king, basically, and has a deal for him. He proposes a deal. And this is the way that Socrates describes it. Again, I'm reading from Phaedrus. All right. The story I heard is set in Naucratis in Egypt, where there is one of the ancient gods of Egypt, the one to whom the bird they call the ibis is sacred. Well, there you go. I didn't need to look it up. Whose name is Thoth, or Thuth. This deity was the inventor of number, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy, of games involving drafts and dice, and especially of writing. So I was right. I haven't actually read this in a few years. So I'm glad that I don't have to cut out being incorrect about that. At that time, the king of the whole of Egypt, around the capital city of the inland region, the city the Greeks call the Egyptian Thebes, was Thamus, or Ammon, as the Greeks call him. Thoth came to Thamus and showed him the branches of expertise that he had invented, and suggested that they should be spread throughout Egypt. Thamus asked him what good each would do, and subjected Thoth's explanations to criticism if he thought he was going wrong, and praise if he thought he was right. So I guess, for whatever reason, Egyptian god Thoth is coming out and saying, here's the things I can give you, here's all my inventions, what do you want for Egypt, your kingdom? The story goes that Thamus expressed himself at length to Thoth about each of the branches of expertise, both for and against them. So presumably he's going through math, arithmetic, astronomy, geometry, and so on. It would take a long time to go through all Thamus's views, but when it was the turn of writing, Thoth said, "Your Highness, this science will increase the intelligence of the people of Egypt and improve their memories. For this invention is a potion for memory and intelligence." Now remember the word potion, because that's the word Pharmakon. But Thamus replied, "You are most ingenious, Thoth, but one person has the ability to bring branches of expertise into existence, another to assess the extent to which they will harm or benefit those who use them. So one's the inventor, that's Thoth, and one's the one who decides whether they should be used or not, and Thomas is taking that responsibility on himself as king, which is also important for Derrida's interpretation coming up. The loyalty you feel to writing as its originator has led you to tell me the opposite of its true effect. It will atrophy people's memories. Trust in writing will make them remember things by relying on marks made by others from outside themselves, not on their own inner resources, and so writing will make the things that they have learned disappear from their minds. Your invention is a potion for jogging the memory, not remembering. So this is important because he's saying it jogs the memory in this translation. It's not true memory. And this distinction between true memory and false memory is very important for Plato, as I'll hope to explain. You provide your students with the appearance of intelligence, not real intelligence, because your students will be widely read. Though without any contact with a teacher, they will seem to be men of wide knowledge, when they will usually be ignorant. And this spurious appearance of intelligence will make them difficult company. And then Phaedrus' response is, Socrates, it doesn't take much for you to make up stories from Egypt and anywhere else in the world you feel like. So that's the story. And this has been glossed very often. I think it was also glossed by Bernard Stiegler. I did a little section on Stiegler, RIP, in the video I did on posthumanism almost a year ago now. And that's that writing takes on its own organic development alongside humans as an instrument of memory. But it also gives us the entire discipline of history. So writing is very important, but in this Socratic dialogue, writing's bad. And the reason that it's bad is that it cuts off you from the presence of the teacher. And the presence of the teacher is what imparts true wisdom in this case. So Thoth coming and saying, this is a potion that will aid memory. And there's a bunch of translations for this word, as I'll explain in a second. And then the king says, no, I don't want it. That's going to devalue presence as a goal, or as a virtue, we could say. My battery's flashing, so I'm going to quick change it and be right back. Check. Okay. Still got a bit of light left. Man, today is not my day. Where was I? Phaedrus has just heard Socrates' explanation of Thoth offering Thamus a whole bunch of gifts. And Thamus says, sure, I'll take them all, except for writing. I don't want writing, because it will make it so that my people can't remember anything in the true sense of remembering, as opposed to some false sense of remembering. So if people are reading books all the time, then they won't understand true wisdom. They'll just look like they know wisdom. So there's a difference here. The first of many differences, by the way, between truth and appearance. So Derrida goes through all of Western philosophy looking for these distinctions. Good and evil, light versus dark, the eye versus the other senses, from white mythology. Man, woman, I don't know if he talks about that, but it would be the same kind of hierarchy that we don't know we maintain, but it's maintained by a whole metaphysical apparatus in the history of philosophy for Derrida. That's where he goes to find these distinctions. So presence and absence is one of the main ones of these. So the presence of the speaker, of the teacher, is very important if you want to learn correctly. And this is part and parcel of the whole apparatus of Western metaphysics that begins with Plato. So we know that from Nietzsche and Heidegger, who Derrida is in their sort of deconstructive tradition a little bit, they blame Plato for metaphysics, and metaphysics being obsessed with being as opposed to becoming. There's another distinction, being, becoming. And all three of them, Nietzsche, Heidegger, Derrida, are all trying to get to the repressed term and draw out its importance. So in this case, it's speech, which is placed above writing. And there's a lot of thought, or a lot of papers and things that have been written on Phaedrus in media studies and literature and elsewhere. Some of it suggests that Plato's being ironic, because Plato's writing this down, right? Plato's writing down Socrates' words. If Socrates existed, probably did, and probably didn't have exactly these conversations in this way. It's confusing to me why he would be ironic. I think he didn't have a sense of the mediation of what he was doing. Maybe he did He never comments on it, so it's hard to tell. But Plato writes down Socrates saying, we don't want to, or telling a story at least, we don't want to have writing because then you don't have access to true knowledge, just the image or appearance of knowledge. And if you know anything about the Platonic universe, it's based on this distinction between true and appearance and levels of appearance. So the further you get from the truth, the more lost in appearances you become. The famous example is the cave. The real sun is outside the cave. The false sun, the fire, is inside the cave, and people are watching shadows cast off or cast by the false sun, except for the philosopher who gets out of the cave of appearances and gets to the true sun, the outside sun. That's the real source of knowledge. And this memory thing is the same. It's like you can, one of the words for truth, and this is a Heideggerian gloss, is aletheia. And aletheia literally means, like, Leth is a river in Greek mythology where you go into it and you lose all your memories. If you cross Leth, you forget. So Leth is like forgetting, and aletheia is an unforgetting. And this again fits in with Plato's world, or Socrates' world at least, that true knowledge is unforgetting the part of us that got lost when we were born. Because we used to be part of the world of forms, and then we were, cast into a place where we forgot. And we have to remember the truth that we used to know, and now we forgot it. So this true memory versus the appearance of memory is based on that. You need to find the true knowledge within you or within the words of your teacher. So this is a little bit mystical, and I think that's what Derrida is pointing attention to, is like we hold this distinction, and he's not worried about like what Greek cosmology was, but he says that this maintenance of the distinction between presence and absence is carried all the way through history, all the way until structuralist linguistics like Saussure, who says the sign is just a representation of a verbal sound that comes out of your mouth, and then both are attached to the concept. But speech is primary, and then words, written words, are just speech without the speaker there. And what this means for something like interpretation is that you need to get to what the source offers something that you can't get from within the text. Their intention, their goals, their life history, the struggles they had growing up, all these things are going to be the reasons that they wrote the text the way they did. And the Derridian quote, "There is no outside text," il n'y a pas hors texte, that shows that if you go back to the source, you're actually just going back to another text. It's not more true than the first one you had. And this gives a lot of freedom if you want trying to get the output of this. It speaks again to creativity, because you're not beholden to this like disciplinary law of hermeneutics, of how you should read. But there's always going to be play that goes on in interpretation, because interpretation is textual, and textual always has these internal plays. So back to the story, the word potion, Thoth offers him a potion. Well, he offers him writing, but writing is said here to be a potion for memory and intelligence. And he says it in a positive sense. So the word pharmakon, I think the closest correlate would be for us. Potion they chose here in this translation, probably because of Derrida's article on this, because the original translation that Derrida is dealing with calls it medicine. So medicine is always something good. A potion could be something good or bad. And the same word that we use for it is drug. Pharmakon, pharmacy, kind of means drug in the sense that drugs can be good, can be bad. And the Greek sense of pharmakon has the same, in which the pharmakon can be an aid, a help, a medicine, or it can be a poison, a cure and a poison at the same time. So Derrida was writing on the translation that he was reading, saying that this is a mistranslation that destroys that distinction that's being made here. And the distinction comes up in the text because Thamus says back to Thoth, you're giving this to me as a potion or as a medicine, but you're trying to trick me, basically, or you're trying to trick my people into accepting this, which is kind of funny to think about. There's a lot of media study stuff you could do with this the denial or repression of writing in writing as it's happening. All the way up to McLuhan, we're returning to an orality, a sense of orality, a secondary orality. Right now, actually, because you're listening to my voice. So does that restore that presence? Or because I'm speaking into a camera here, is that not the restoration of presence? But that's not particularly important to Derrida. That's not what he's going to do with it. So after this story, Derrida ties in the king to what we would call like the authority of all of Western metaphysics, which is, Christian theology mixed with Greek philosophy, more or less. This is why Heidegger calls it ontotheology. The being, ontos, and theology, study of God, gets all mixed into one thing. And being elevated means becoming is repressed. So if you've heard me speak before on process metaphysics is those philosophers, Deleuze and Whitehead, Bergson, who are trying to return time to a sense of dignity, becoming to a sense of dignity and process, rather than looking at forms, ideas, and causes. So the king here is important because the king's word is law. That's what you are when you are a king. And that's what this presence is that's so important here, is the king, or Derrida's interpretation is that the king doesn't want writing because now his word will not be the only law. And this word law is maybe not the right word, but it gets to another Derridian criticism, which is logocentrism. Now the word logos, logos is a very, very difficult word. It's impossible to translate. And you could write entire books on it because it's carried through the whole ontotheological tradition. If you know the Gospel of St. John, it begins with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The Word was God in the beginning. And then he goes on to say that Christ is the Word made flesh. And that term word there is logos. And that what logos means, I'm not confident in this 100%, but logos means word in the sense of an authoritative word, in the same way that God has control over nature, or he speaks to nature and tells it what to do. That would be the logos. And Heraclitus gives it the sense of where we have the word logic descend from. So he gives it the whole sense of rationality and order. And it all connects in this one word, logos, which I am probably not the one to elucidate for you, but it connects it's the unification of the whole ontotheological tradition, especially Christian philosophy mixed with this Greek philosophy that has being and authority, invisible being and authority, as the cause of everything else that happens. So in Derrida's interpretation, what's happening here is the king wants to maintain his speech authority because he is the king. So the king, their word is law. They make decrees. They make commandments. They tell people what to do. And as soon as they tell people what to do, you have to do it because they're the king. And Derrida gets in this sense that this is what philosophy has continued to believe unconsciously the rest of history. Up till Saussure, when Saussure says the speech is just secondary to writing, writing is primary. Speech is primary. And what Derrida is interested in is all the places in writing that speech can't get to. So I might do another one of these on différance. But when English speakers say différence, you're drawing out the distinction that's in the writing that you can't hear if you just say the word difference, which is how it's spelled, obviously in French. But we have this main maintenance of authority is what's Derrida is interested in undercutting. And by undercutting that, you undercut the talk of something like the canon, the Western canon, that includes the Bible and Shakespeare and Kant and Hegel and Hobbes. And you have to read like these figures of authority to understand the world, more or less. And that's what I always don't want to rip on Hegelians, but it's a very Hegelian notion that if you read the whole canon, then you're like caught up to your point of self-consciousness in history. History would be another one of those authoritative terms. Like if we see a contradiction in history, then history is the resolution of contradictions, the development of contradictions appearing and being resolved. That's an external authority that determines what happens in our experience. So Derrida, by pointing to this distinction in the word pharmakon, poison and cure, shows that and this is not the only example of where he does it, of course. This is an emblematic example of where he does it with a bunch of different texts, including a different text including the Republic by Plato. But where there's this invisible authoritative background, the god or the sun outside the cave, that is the father that dictates lesser reality. And Deleuze, of course, wouldn't like this either, because as soon as you have a greater reality and a lesser reality, then you're no longer univocal. She gets from Spinoza. So there's like there's a whole tension in this little bit here that describes the tension in philosophy. So when writing, it's both true and false that writing kills memory. But I think, and Derrida doesn't say this explicitly, but I think Derrida is in favor of writing killing the sense of true memory, for exactly the same reason that Nietzsche describes the death of God. Because the authority over writing here is that same authority that God exerts in history causally. And if you take God out of the picture, then yeah, it's like it's horrifying and terrible, and you have to take the entire burden of meaning on yourself. But then meaning becomes a lot more playful. It becomes an area, a space where you can look at double meanings and where you can read history in different ways. So I think Derrida is celebrating this a little bit because he plays it out. He performs it by the way he writes. And the way he writes are these, like for example, one of his books is a third of the book is in the footnotes, a third of the book is written in the actual margin, and then like the main body of the book is still on the main page. So he's doing all these things trying to escape the authority of text in the way we would give authority to, I don't know, like the history of philosophy, say. And for him, that's basically the same thing as a theologian giving primacy of authority to a sacred text, like a Bible or something like that. So he says we're reading, believing in these fathers, the great men of Western civilization, and we're reading as if they were still in the text, like ghosts. Derrida loves ghosts. But we don't need to do that because they're not in the text as ghosts. And the text itself is not as coherent as it appears, even when you're reading the most systematic philosophers, because they make these jumps, they have little double meanings buried in there and don't even notice that they're using them. So the task of a good reader, like Derrida wants to be, is to go find where they made not intentional mistakes, but where they repressed a double meaning, like where they translated the Pharmakon into medicine instead of poison, right? That's a translation decision. It's getting super dark out here, which really sucks because I had some quotes. Or maybe I'll just give you one. All right, so I will just read you the few things that I've highlighted. This is from the Derrida's Dissemination. The king, the father of speech, has thus asserted his authority over the father of writing. This is Themis versus Thoth. And Themis wants to maintain the authority of speech, obviously, because he's a king and authority. In order for these contrary values, good, evil, true, false, essence, appearance, inside, outside, to be in opposition, each of these terms must be external to the other, which means that one of these oppositions must already be accredited the matrix of all possible opposition. So you have one truth, one true form, and the other is a bad copy or an imitation or a lesser reality. So a text in general is a less authoritative version of speech. You're making binaries and then putting one over the other. And one thing Derrida's very keen on is showing what writing can do that text or that speech can't, right? Double meanings and things like this. He goes into, or he's here elaborating, all translations into languages that are heirs and depositories of Western metaphysics thus produce on the Pharmakon an effect of analysis that violently destroys it, reduces it to one of its simple elements by interpreting it, that is, by putting one over the other. There is no such thing as a harmless remedy. The Pharmakon can never be simply beneficial. So the act of repression is violence, and it's not saying that one's good and one's bad. I think all he's really doing is drawing attention to the fact that this repression has been made. And one last thing. This is when he talks basically directly to us. The reader will have paused to reflect that the relation, the analogy between logos and soul and the Pharmakon body relation is itself designated by the term logos. The name of the relation is the same as that of one of its terms. The Pharmakon is comprehended in the structure of logos. This comprehension is an act of both domination and decision. So domination, this is the act of domination here is the act of one term being positive and the other act, or the other term, by virtue of its relation to that first term, is just then taken as negative. So in this case, speech is positive writing, because it's missing the speaker, that's all writing is, it's a missing speaker, is taken as a negative. And Plato does the same thing with the soul and the body. The body is made of the stuff of the universe that doesn't have the soul stuff, the true stuff in it, and that's your true self. And this is every term, presence, absence. So by making speech into the positive term and text into the negative term, we've done a violence in separating the world into two different planes. And this is like the moment of agreement between someone like Deleuze and Derrida. Is Derrida's opposed to all the places where that's happened, all the versions of text in which it's happened, and most especially with the tradition of metaphysics, which combines this Greek philosophy stuff with the whole Christian tradition of God becomes flesh. The flesh is, the vessel that has to be redeemed because it's a lower form of reality. Then you die and you go back to your higher form of reality. So anything that striates reality into positive terms versus negative terms, or good and bad, I think that's what they're looking for, those crucial points where that occurs. Well, thanks for listening. It's getting really cold out here and dark. So you have Walmart to thank for that, my battery for dying, whole lot of problems. But I hope you enjoyed it. It was fun for me to get to do some of this rereading today. And thanks a lot for watching. I hope you're remembering, in the true sense of the word, that I'm bringing out the forgotten truth from out of your soul, because that's what a teacher is supposed to do, according to Socrates. Anyway, bunch of bullshit. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you again soon.